Hello, everyone, and welcome to Virtual Planetarium, The Sky Tonight, part of our MOS at Home programming. My name is Janine, my pronouns are she and her, and I'll be your moderator today. That means that I'll be reading some of your questions and responses, which you can submit below using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen here in the Zoom meeting. If you'd like to see captions during today's program, you can click on the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitles. And if you're joining us on Facebook, hello, welcome. So excited to have you here. Unfortunately, I'm unable to read your comments at this time. We're so delighted to have all of you here as our audience, and let's meet our guide who's going to tell us what's up in the sky tonight.
Hello, everybody. My name is Katie. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm going to be your guide for talking about what's up in the night sky. And I'm really excited for this program because it is National Latinx Heritage Month. So this program is going to be focused around the constellations as seen by various indigenous groups of people in Latin America. And I believe National Latinx Heritage Month started on September 15th and it goes until October 15th. So there's a little bit of both in both months. And this program is going to be really similar to a program that happened yesterday on MOS on Espanol. It's a Spanish program about the same constellations. And if you'd like to check that out, that's available on Facebook. And it happened just yesterday. So check that out if you're interested. All right, so I'm going to share my screen now. We're going to be using Stellarium as always for these night sky programs. This is a free software. You can download it at stellarium.org. We'll have the link for you at the end of the program if you'd like to check it out on your own. But it's a really awesome software because not only does it just allow you to look up at the stars, but it lets you choose where you'd like to view from, at what time of the year or what year you want to view. And it also has different sets of constellations for various cultures around the world. So lots of utility and just variety in what you can do with Stellarium. So we're going to take advantage of that today. There are lots and lots of indigenous groups to Mesoamerica and parts of South America. And so there's too many to cover all in one program, and they all have really interesting constellation stories. So we're going to focus on two today. The first one we'll be talking about are the Aztec peoples, and even that is actually a group of lots and lots of different groups, subsets of indigenous people that kind of fall under Aztec people. They all share a common language of Nahuatl, and they're all kind of located more in the northern part of Mexico. So near Mexico City in that area, and the farther south you get, that kind of gets into Central America. So we're gonna stay kind of on the northern side. And so it's still in the northern hemisphere. So normally when we have these programs, we're usually viewing from around Boston because that's where the Museum of Science is located. But today we are going to be viewing from Mexico City. And since it is in the Northern Hemisphere, a lot of these constellations you will probably recognize. You'll probably maybe know some of the Western terms for a lot of the groups of stars, but hopefully you'll learn something new. So I have this again in Mexico City, and we are all the way back in the year 1400. So this was during a time where the Aztec civilization was really flourishing, and just a lot happening in terms of science and other topics of knowledge. And so this is where this time is where a lot of the astronomy and mythology and folklore has come out of. So we're looking east right now, and we're going to focus on a group of stars. If we move up a little bit, this tiny group of stars right here, and we can zoom in. And if you would like, please feel free to use the chat to enter in what you think this group of stars might be called. If you know it in any of the cultures, or just what you think it might look like. What do you think it's made of? Just type your observations in the chat.
Just waiting to see. Oh, we've got a couple coming in. One person is suggesting a school of stars, Orion, Pleiades, seven sisters.
Yeah, it is a school of stars. It's a star cluster. So there are lots and lots of stars in this part of the sky. And for the folks saying Pleiades or the Seven Sisters, that is correct. That is the kind of general Western name for this group of stars. Subaru is the Japanese version that means the Seven Sisters. But for the Aztec people, this group of stars is its own constellation. So normally this like when we talk about the Pleiades, it's considered part of the Western or Greek constellation of Taurus, the bull. But in Aztec culture, this is a constellation all on its own, and it is called the market. So we'll zoom in a little more. It's hard to see the constellation lines because it's it takes up such a small part of the sky. So I'll add the artwork in as well. There we go. So this is the market or marketplace. It is called officially Tianqitzli. So I'll spell it in case you wanted to do some more research later. It's Tianqitzli, Tianqitzli. And this constellation was really important to the Aztec people. And as a matter of fact, the Pyramid of the Sun, which is near Mexico City, it's a very, very large pyramid that was constructed by the Aztecs. Historians believe that the pyramid is actually in line with the motion of this constellation over the course of the year when it's visible, which is pretty cool. And so the reason that this particular group of stars was so important is that it signified different, like the start of the dry season or the rainy season, depending on what time of the year it is. And so it drove one of their calendars. It was kind of the central point to one of their calendars. They had two calendars. One was centered on religious ceremonies, and then the other was agriculture. So anytime that this constellation was appearing over in the east, so if it was rising in the east, that meant, so we're kind of a little bit further into the fall right now. I actually have this set for the end of October. But if we were, looking at it closer to this time of the year, it'd be lower on the horizon. But the rising of this constellation signified the start of the dry season for this area. And so over the course of the wintertime, it gets really, really high up in the sky. And then eventually it starts to set in the springtime. And so when this constellation sets, that indicates the start of the wet season or the rainy season. So it was really helpful for agriculture. And every once in a while, specifically every 52 years, the two calendars lined up, and so they matched. And when that happened, a lot of the Aztec people thought that that meant the world, or the end of the world, could be coming. Which is very frequent to have that scare every 52 years. So what they would do, according to stories and folklore, is that they'd have ceremonies, they'd stay up all night and just track Tianqitzli in the sky over the course of the night. And as long as it behaved like they thought it would behave, so as long as they saw it pretty much throughout the night, that meant that the end of the world was not near and that they were good to go, which I'm sure was a huge relief. All right, so that's a little bit of background behind Tianqitzli, also known as the Pleiades. So look out for that this winter. You'll be able to see it very prominently as we head into the late fall and early winter, even from up here in Boston. And so now let's turn our attention to the north part of the sky. And we're going to look at, I went the long way. We're going to look at another pretty famous group of stars. So let me kind of back out a little bit. All right, so in this general area of the sky. So if you recognize any particular groups of stars, constellations, any one star in particular, go ahead and type it in the chat.
While we're waiting for people to type in the chat what stars they might notice, there's a question about what are stars made of?
Great question. So stars are giant balls of plasma, which is basically really, really hot energized gas. So hydrogen and helium is what makes up most of stars, and they're really, really massive. And this material is so hot and energized that it almost turns into almost like a liquid, not quite a liquid, but it's called plasma, and it kind of acts like a liquid. And so that's what stars are made of, and they're very, very hot, and it's kind of weird to think about, but gas, really hot gas.
Yeah, mostly hydrogen and helium.
Yes.
We have one answer that is a big star, which I like.
Yeah, you're not wrong. There are lots of big stars in this part of the sky, but if you're looking at this one in particular, that is a really famous star, and it's part of the next constellation that I'm going to show you. So this constellation is called Shonkuli, or the Twisted Foot, and you can see it spelled out here. Again, if you want to do more research, I'll do that throughout the program. So it's Xoneculi, or the Twisted Foot. And now that I've connected the constellation lines, does anyone recognize what we would commonly refer to this group of stars as?
I think the hint that we're looking north is very apropos. Oh, there we go. We've got one from Eric saying Little Dipper.
Yeah, it is the Little Dipper. And there's actually there's still a lot that's unknown exactly about this constellation, because a lot of Aztec astronomy records was lost during the Spanish conquest during, I believe it was 1521, sometime around there. And so there's a lot of information that's missing. And so you'll notice that there's a lot of the sky that is not connected. There are some other constellations here as well, but there's a lot that's missing because so much information was lost. So a lot of historians believe that Shonkuli, or the Twisted Foot, refers to the Little Dipper. I think that's the general consensus there, but there are some scholars and historians that believe that it could have also referred to the Big Dipper as well. But we'll go with the Little Dipper just because Stellarium seems to have taken that side of things. And the Twisted Foot is referring to the foot of a god called, I wrote this down, Nana Watson. So that's Nanahuatzin. So Nana Watson was a very humble god, according to Aztec folklore. And he was depicted as being really sickly and covered in boils and sores, and he had a twisted foot. Not a super great image, but he was a god, someone that eventually became a god, and was very humble. And so during this period in folklore, there were multiple sun gods and also moon gods. And those gods decided that there should be a new sun god and a new moon god. So I'm going to read you part of a tale about the god Nana Watson with the twisted foot, and how he became the new sun god. All right, so there was another person named Tecciztecatl, 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 who is a very wealthy and strong person that the older gods chose to be the new sun god. And then they chose Nana Watson, who was, humble and sickly, to be the god of the moon. Now, in order to make that transition, they had to jump into a pit of fire and actually sacrifice themselves. And so when Tecciztecatl got up to the fire, he looked at the fire and just got really scared and ran away. Honestly, cannot blame him. So he ran away, but then Nana Watson came up to the fire and calmly stepped into it. And when Tecciztecatl saw that, he felt ashamed, and so he jumped in afterwards. And so they both became sun gods for a brief moment. But the older gods were pretty angry at Tecciztecatl for getting scared and ashamed at first for jumping into the fire. So they whacked him in the face with a rabbit, and that dimmed his light a little bit. And then he ended up becoming the moon god And that's also one of the stories about how you can see a rabbit on the surface of the moon, which I think is really interesting because there are so many East Asian cultures that come from Chinese folklore, Japanese folklore, Korean, some Southeast Asian folklores as well, that all refer to this rabbit on the moon, and that developed totally separately in the Aztec culture as well. So it's really interesting to see humans around the world observe the same things and have the same curiosities, but then have all of these really rich and unique folklore and mythologies and stories. And so I just thought that was a pretty cool, fun fact. So that's just one of many legends behind this constellation. I could go on and on about some others that I did some reading about. But I did want to mention one other really cool ritual that happens today in Mexico. It's called the Dance of the Flyers, where there's this really big pole, and these dancers like kind of hook themselves up to the pole with rope by their feet. And so they'll hang off of it and then dance and spin around the pole. And a lot of people believe that it's kind of indicating the North Star, which is the star right here that I was referring to earlier, very famous star. And the rest, and the people that are dancing around it, are the rest of the constellation. So if we move time forward, you'll actually see that the North Star stays fixed. That's why it's so useful, because of Earth's rotation. It looks like stars are moving around the North Star, so it's always in the same place, but the rest of the constellation kind of dances around the North Star. So that could be, one inspiration for this tradition that happens today in Mexico. All right, so those are just two constellations from the Aztec people. So I want to move on and talk about another group of people. And to do that, we are going to get rid of these constellations. I'm going to set the star lore to the Northern Andes. So we're moving south. All right, and we will go to today's date. But we will make sure that it's nighttime. Otherwise, we won't be able to see any stars, which is the whole reason we came here. All right, so we'll go to about 8:30 is probably a good time. And let me just make sure we can see everything we need to see. All right, we are good. So it's today's date, just a little bit later on in the evening, and we'll set ourselves back to Boston. All right. There we go. All right. So the Northern Andes is a kind of a regional area that makes up a lot of northern South America. So we're talking about places like Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, even some parts of Peru. But the Andes are a mountain range that kind of follow along the western part of South America. And it goes all the way from the places I just mentioned, all the way down to the southern tip of Chile and Argentina. It's the longest mountain range in the entire world. And they're incredibly high as well. And it's very dry, and it makes it really easy to observe stars because you're elevated if you're viewing, on a plateau. A lot of cities are built on plateaus in the Andes. Cities like Quito, Ecuador, or Bogota, or Medellin, all of these places, these really, really big cities, are built on these plateaus really high up. And at those elevations, there's a lot less atmosphere. So it makes viewing the night sky just really, really amazing. And the plane of the Milky Way, so this big cloudy band that's stretching across the sky, is extremely prominent in the southern hemisphere, especially in the Andes regions, because of the lack of light pollution and the fact that it's so dry and you're so elevated. So the Milky Way is much, much brighter. And I've actually bumped up the brightness of the Milky Way a little bit here. And so a lot of the cultures in the Northern Andes, and again, lots of different indigenous groups of people that make up the Northern Andean cultures. And so one of them, the Pasto people, which a lot of what I'm going to be talking about, a lot of the constellations are from. And they saw constellations not only between the stars, but also in the dark parts of our galaxy. So the reason we see this plane of lots of gas and dust and stars across the sky, if there's no light pollution, is because we live in a big spiral disk. And so we're viewing it edge on. And so that's kind of the densest part. And so we're literally looking right into the rest of the galaxy. And the darker parts are actually regions where the gas and dust is absorbing most of the light rather than reflecting light. So it's not that there's nothing there. It's just that there's no light really being given off, at least visible light. If you look in other wavelengths of light, you can see some stuff. But a lot of these cultures, and actually they're the only cultures in the world that actually made constellations out of these darker regions. So, and they're called dark constellations. So the first one that we're going to find today is actually going to be in between, or kind of in between a couple of stars that are prominent up here in the northern hemisphere. So even though these cultures are mainly in the equatorial region, some of them are even in the southern hemisphere, they're close enough to the northern hemisphere that even from here in Boston, we can see some of these dark constellations as well. All right, so these three stars right here make up a prominent asterism, so just a really familiar group of stars in the night sky, and this is called the Summer Triangle. And we've got Vega, which is the brightest of the three stars. Then we have Deneb and we have Altair. And the Milky Way runs right through them. So if you're ever looking for one or the other, you know, they're both good indicators of each other. If you can find the triangle, you found the Milky Way. If you found the Milky Way, you can follow it until you find the triangle. So once you find those three stars, you can take Vega and Altair and then connect them down to a star called Antares, which is actually a little bit below the horizon here. Let's see if we can go 1 month into the future and see if that, or should have been behind. That's okay. It's below the horizon. But once you find, and you can see it, it's much more prominent in the summertime. So if you're viewing in June or July, you'll be able to spot Antares. But imagine that it's kind of like right over here below the horizon. If you look in between Altair and Antares, there's this big dark spot in the Milky Way. So we'll zoom in and go ahead and try to come up with something that you think would fit in well in this dark spot, and you can put it in the chat.
This reminds me of staring at the clouds and trying to find something in the clouds.
Definitely.
Only now they're interstellar clouds.
Yeah, works the same way. I definitely find it a little bit harder sometimes to make out pictures in these darker regions. And I think it's just because it's not as bright up here, especially if you're near the city, because there's a lot of light pollution and it's harder to make out those kind of defined edges. But from the southern hemisphere, it's a lot clearer.
Yeah, especially when you're that high up.
Mm-hmm.
Eric says a seahorse, and Neil says EATH, which I'm not sure if is Earth or is something else.
Interesting. Okay. I love the seahorse guess because those are one of my favorite animals, and that would be really cool if there was one. But this area is actually a monkey. So let me put the artwork up. That'll help you see it a little bit. And this is actually pretty seahorse-like, this swirly tail over here. So that's a pretty good guess. So the monkey is one of many dark constellations that are animals. So a lot of these cultures saw the dark constellations as living creatures or living beings. whereas all of the stars that made up constellations were inanimate objects, and the Milky Way was like a big celestial river across the sky where all of the animals were kind of going to drink water. So you will find, if you do more research about these constellations, that a lot of them are animals of some sort, which is pretty cool. And the monkey here is kind of acts similarly to Tianquitzli for the Aztecs, because it helped them develop a calendar, and it also meant the start of the dry season or the rainy season. Except for us here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're entering into the fall, but in the Southern Hemisphere, they're entering into the spring. So when the monkey was rising, even though it rises now during this time of the year, then it would actually be the opposite season in the Southern Hemisphere. So similar meanings for agriculture and, ceremonies and rituals and things like that. The monkey had a big role. All right, and there's one more that I want to show you because we're running out of time. And so we're just going to kind of flip-flop to the other side of the sky here, look into the northeast. And I've given this one away already because I forgot to take it down, but that's okay. If you look in the northeastern part of the sky again, along the Milky Way, and we zoom in here, you can look for the constellation that looks like a zigzag. So in Greek astronomy, this is known as Cassiopeia, the Queen. But near Cassiopeia, you can see these darker regions within the Milky Way. And those are the regions we're talking about. So they saw all of these lines, but then they saw a warrior holding an arrow. And so again, maybe the warrior was there, because all the other animals were there at the watering hole, the celestial watering hole. So maybe it was there to hunt the animals, or maybe it was there just to be with the animals and also drink from the watering hole. I'm not totally sure. But the all of the folklore that's kind of associated with this part of the sky and the Milky Way is just really fascinating, especially because there really aren't any other cultures besides the Andean cultures that saw these constellations. So I know we are out of time now, so I will stop talking. I hope you learned something new, and please feel free to go on and do some more research about constellations, about other cultures.
Well, I'll start everybody off. Hopefully you can all give Katie a virtual round of applause and a thank you for teaching us about some cool new constellations that I certainly didn't know about before. And now I really want to go to Peru and hang out in some mountains and get to see some beautiful dark constellations. How cool is that? So we'll say bye to Katie.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
And I will say thank you all so much for joining us. We really hope you enjoyed learning. And if you would like to see more programs like this, we do them fairly often. A lot of our MOS at Home programs are related to astronomy and space, so definitely check those out. We have several virtual planetarium programs. We also now offer some in Spanish, so if you are a native Spanish speaker or want to learn more about Spanish, learn more in Spanish, there's an opportunity for you. You can check us out on Facebook and on YouTube, and we do have a specific MOS page now for MOS en Español. If you'd like to see all those other programs, you can also follow the museum on our other social media channels. You can check out mos.org/MOS at home. If you enjoyed today's presentation, we really appreciate any support that you can provide to us to support more programming like this. You can do that by visiting engaged.mos.org/welcome and support MOS at home. And as Katie mentioned at the beginning of the show, today's program was produced using the free software Stellarium, which you can find at stellarium.org. It's totally free. And Katie gave you some shortcuts and neat tricks about how you can use it and learn about the sky where you are. We hope you'll join us again soon. Thanks so much.